here it is for small press traffic, going live on the conversation. So just off bat, I just have to say that this book really, really managed to remind me of everything I love about poetry. Just like the depth of language, the research elements, the new sounds, you have Pierre Joris who writes a preface to this book, and calls you a nomad language migrator. And I think that is such an apt description for the ways in which this book is so nomadic, itinerant in some moments, hanging with Yinglosia, lick and spit. I'm thinking of all of these sort of different aspects to the wider territory that is your poetics, which I feel like this book, is very much like uh, uh, an increased velocity of the foundations that Pierre Joris set forth with Nomad Poetics, and this feels like Mad Max Fury Road. you know.
Well, we should probably say, I mean, that how many years have we known each other that we're coming back together in this way? Is it like 13 years?
Like 13 years?
Yeah.
Maybe 14? Yeah, no, 13.
And you're definitely the first poet that I knew before either of us knew that we were poets. And it was just absolutely wild to read your book, to read RoseSunWater. It's like hearing echoes, interdiasporic echoes of my own writing, and finding all of these sort of vibrating lines and words that like led me back to these places that I had been in my writing, but suddenly I was somewhere else, in your writing. And wild that these two books came out side by side on the operating system, with huge thanks to Eli Moss, editor and publisher extraordinaire of the operating system. And it's just, I'm still sort of trying to wrap my mind around it, how we wrote and published these books without, having been in contact for all these years, and somehow, in a way, thinking, in two tandem minds somehow.
Yeah. I love so much about the ways in which our books have these resonances, right? Like, I know the last time we talked, we were talking about, I brought up to you this notion of like a bioluminescent language, and a way in which like energetically these things are calling and magnetizing to each other across time and space. So much of your book feels like an invitation and an incantation to something that is both ancient and future. Um, and I love the ways in which the text asks me to celebrate, and the ways in which you choose to teach your reader throughout, right? The reader is never sort of like in the deep end alone. There are these notes at the end of each section that sort of like help provide a lens through which to see the things. But also within the text itself, it's like there are these notes and translations, right? There is this note on pronunciation. There is this added definition that exists, and this sort of, it creates this kind of like energetically holographic experience, right? It's very multivalent, it's multisensory. And I think, one question that I have for you, actually, because I did think about some questions, how did you arrive at these sections altogether? I mean, because it feels like, and I think you have mentioned this in the past, but it feels like each of these is their own individual book, and yet they've come together in this, like, it's like magnets. It's like it's this codex of feeling, of compassion. And so I wonder how, what maybe was the process in arriving at this arrangement.
Right. Yeah, it's a really great question, and one that I think um, we all ask ourselves, like when on the other side of publishing a book, is like, oh, how did that happen? Like was just like writing a poem, and then like there it is, like. So I mean, I think part of it has to do with like these ongoing suites that like in fact every section of the book is ongoing.
Mm.
uh, there may be some sort of like sister volume to Unnatural Bird Migrator. um, but at the same time it had to do with a sense of juxtaposing and wanting there to be sort of lots of different tones and modalities um, playing against one another, and you know working together and against each other in certain ways, so that there would be something beyond just sort of the continuity of a single suite that would go through an entire book. And speaking of which, I feel this way so much about your book, which is that first of all, not only about this sense that like the reader is not in the deep end, like first of all, like uh, there's so many books like being written in this single book, and
Mm.
um, you're pointing in so many directions, while at the same time so centered, actually centered in this submersion in the cenote, that I feel that actually this is like somehow all vibrating out of the cenote, and but what I find is that like there is this, the book sort of begins with what you might think is going to be the kind of voice or mode of the whole book, which is this gorgeous sort of streaming together of sentences. I have some here. I remember that I do not remember. All I can do is hold them together in my memory, piling all this language next to me, counting the containers and measuring their weight. And is this sentence a year yet, or
Mm.
does anyone ever really die? Did we ever exist at all? But then at some point in the book, there's like a guide, like and it might be a ghost also, or maybe it's multiple ghosts that sort of shows up, and it's like they were there all along, also, like,
Mm.
and that guide is like with you to like, and it's right, like it's like at the exact right time. It's like with you to like take you through the really naughty parts and help you through, so that you don't have to just like sort of um, doggy paddle by
Mm.
yourself. Like it buoys you, this other voice, which is, for me, and I think one of the things that's happening is that this is a deeply, for me, translingual text. That is,
Mm.
that so much of what's going on in it is happening between languages, between Spanish and English, and between the languages of the living and the languages of the dead, um, and between the languages of production or construction, that is,
Mm.
construction of the sentence, of the book, of the stanza, and destruction of the house, of the civilization, of the history, of the people, um, of the indigeneity, of
Mm.
the space. And so one of the questions, that I had for you actually, and I think that, this just ties into this question of the guide and the
Mm.
ghost, is, what does that, I've described what I think translingual means to me. What does it mean to you if I say like, this book strikes me as translingual? I mean, do you think about this writing as translingual? Do you think about it as multilingual? How do you figure it?
I definitely think about it as a translingual text. And in that way, I think of the ways in which the text is queering the notion of multilingual. And I think your text as well is very much queering these notions of what a multilingual or a polyphonic text would be. And instead, it's almost as though there is this third space, right? There is this trans space in which it is not dictated by a binary. And in the same way, and you mentioned spirits, you mentioned ghosts, and I see so much of that in your text as well. Like there are many spirits that live in Unnatural Bird Migrator, and so much of it feels as though these spirits have gathered for a type of celebration, like a type of learning. I think of learning as a type of celebration, right? Education can be a type of liberation, which ultimately is a celebration. And so I think with RoseSunWater, this notion of a translingual text is also notions of queering reality, right? Moving through these various realities of the spirit, of the ghost, of the haunted, the ancestral haunting, right? There are all of these things that are sort of happening. I'm literally traveling through time and space, and here are also like these tidbits of the vast interior, right? And it's sort of the tracing of this vast interior in which I find a borderlands with your text. Like it's almost as though in thinking through these ways of translingual text, there is a type of backdoor that leads to a landscape in which I see you operating and summoning, and there is something very beautiful and just I hesitate to use the word unique for whatever reason, because I know that it's a shared space, right? It is a space in which it is a large landscape, which many texts sort of visit this space, and yet it feels as though like our texts have these like back doors to one another, in which there is this landscape of a nomadic poetics, a translingual poetics, a transgenerational poetics, right? Being called by some ancestral diasporic energy to bring forth this language, to remember these words, to say something about these energies, right? As you mentioned, the cenote, this sort of underground current of energy, right? And so that's where I feel like our texts find each other, in this like wilderness, this landscape of energy and ancestry and diaspora that is sort of resisting the ever crushing presence of capitalism.
Yeah, yeah.
When I encounter Yiddish or Hebrew in these poems, I'm reminded of something that is both unfamiliar and familiar, something ancient and new, right? And I feel like your book really holds the weight of those two things in not a tension but a braiding, right?
Yeah, yeah. Everything you're saying is deeply moving to me, and for for a space which can't exist in the present, we conjure this language to
Mm,
stand on. We and this is also related to the sort of archipelagic ideas from people like Glissant, that actually like language could like create islands
mm,
inside of these vast oceans, but also that like within spaces where erasures have taken place, that language can actually sort of become a prosthetic or something like that to that erasure, and function as a sort of um, um, as, as something to hold on to when there's
mm,
nothing left to hold on to stand on when there's nothing left to stand on. Um, and so when I say language scape, like what I mean by that is that I feel that we're both like searching in language
mm,
um, for a place for our poetics to sort of rest, not
mm,
to settle, not to, you know, uh, destroy and rebuild, not to claim, not to lay stake, but to rest, like in the sense of resting for the night
mm,
at a campsite, to dwell momentarily, to sojourn. And that is the diasporic. And it's what the Yiddish modernists, who I see myself very much writing, in an English host, but very much in
mm,
the tradition of this sort of Yiddish modernism, a stateless modernism that never had an army, never had a navy, right? A language without an army and a navy. That's
mm,
the English. I want an English without a government. I want an English without an army and a navy, without um, a standard, dictionary. I want, so, I find that so they called it Yiddishland, and Yiddishland was this imaginary but also very real space.
When I read Lick and Spit, Incantation from the Bowels, who tricked the gods into collecting impure foods to infect the human mouth by omen everything outside which does not come back? And that's when I was just like, oh my, there is a conjuring of an ancient futurity, right? And I think we mentioned this in our last discussion, this notion of an ancient futurity in many ways perhaps may be considered a type of decolonial poetics, right? Decolonization, number one, is a process larger than we could ever cover in a conversation. So like, not even going to really broach that subject, but I do think that it is not a return, but a reimagining.
It's that impurity, or the sort of possibility of impurity, purifies in a certain way. It's like that purification is not actually about purification. It's actually about the impure foods. It's actually about the imports. It's actually about mixture. And it happens so much in your book as well. These even, moments where within a single sentence, you'll move from one language register into another, right? And they're not translating each other. They're actually sort of talking to one another. I think that what it highlights is the fact that all the language that we use all the time is impure, that languages are always fusion and language ideologues, right? Who want to talk about pure English, the English only movement in the United States, or people who want to talk about a pure Hebrew, right? For example. These are projections which are invented in order to cover over something much more complex, which is impurity. And I think the truth of impurity, and when you sort of arrive at it, it has this kind of feeling of purification, that is a feeling of release and being clean of all of the violence and all of the lies of the sort of myth of purity. And so I think like that's my sense also for the kind of stakes of this translingual, that like we are foregrounding this impurity rather than sort of pretending that English holds together. It doesn't. It never has. It can't. And as long as we pretend it does, then we're going to pretend a whole slew of other things that continue to perpetuate, all different sorts of things that violences and oppressions that we may explicitly be against, but then in our language, don't actually challenge, and so I think that's something that we're both doing. We become enmeshed in this language mess. This is you, and yet it's the only way I can reach you. There it is. I mean, that's it. And so we're also talking about the ways in which our languages, like pure language in the sense of language as within a projection of purity, that's not a language that can actually arrive anywhere. That's like a sort of language which has already sort of stopped before it started. And so if we want a language that can travel back into a speculative past in order to move forward into a speculative future, we need a language that's going to see borders as junctions rather than as dead ends.
Well, and so much of this book, I feel, evaporates notions of borders. It's so fascinating to me. And maybe that's why I thought Mad Max Fury Road, right? There is this like unwieldy velocity that occurs within the text. Like Ah, God, I'm gonna just once again lick and spit membrane chant, right? Membrane tied up. My membrane is bent nerve. The enchanter God sent me in front of Samas. I have drawn your picture. I have traced your figure. Having observed your strength, I have crafted your appearance. Espied the shape of your membrane. I have reproduced your features, have bound your membrane and bent your nerves. I have done to you the spell you did to me. And there is this activation here. I have done to you the spell you did to me. I bent your nerves. And I think so much, I'm obsessed with this notion of communicating on the level of the nervous system, capturing the gesture, the impulse of the now, like thinking of Francis Bacon paintings, thinking of Clarice Lispector's, practice of writing on any piece of paper that is nearby, right? And so much of this text, like, and again, I use the word velocity because I am I'm activated and then propelled by this language. It's there, it activates a hunger. It activates this hunger for language, for knowing, for thinking, for wondering. Actually, more than knowing, it activates the wonder. It activates a primary curiosity of the human spirit, in a way that again, it makes me hungry. Like, and maybe that's why I'm using these terms of hunger and nourishment. And maybe that's why I'm going back, because I feel like, you know, especially in the past year of pandemic and, 4 years of fascism in the United States and all, list goes on and on. There is so much that is required of us to simply exist, and it is very difficult to find ways of replenishing that, right? Like you can only return to so many things so many times. You can only say, oh, I'll have a drink about it, or oh, I'll watch a movie about it so many times, and eventually you need something to fill the tank up. And I think what it was is, it's like when I was reading this, I was so running on fumes, just by existing, that it was jarring to be reminded of these reservoirs, right? These reservoirs of energy that we can return to. Like one poem that I return to often is by Bernadette Mayer, "How to Keep Going in Antarctica," right? Be strong, Bernadette. Something that I would often say to myself. And here, it is very much bent your nerves. Like, I'm here to bend your nerve. I am here to conjure the purpose of the poet, right? The radical language shaman that is here to suss out the in-betweenness of reality itself, right? There are multiple realities happening. And here we are finding the language that shines brightest, right? That resonates at the highest frequencies, and bringing them together to just ask for opening, right? To invite wonder, to do these things that I don't know what else can do. I don't know what else does this but poetry.
I have that. I have a few of those poems that many poems that I return to as sort of mantras. One of them, though, since we're talking about nourishment and about hunger, is by my elder Resnikoff, Charles Resnikoff.
Mm.
Salmon and red wine, and a cake fat with raisins. No diet for a writer of verse, you know. And I always think about that. We need our poems fat with raisins.
Mm.
We need our poems served with gourds of red wine, and you know uh, platters of cannabis, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that for both of us, and we discussed this last time, poetry has been not only sort of pleasure, but also a means of survival, and a means of making it through. And we both talk to each other about the ways in which poetry has saved our lives at various times. And I think there's something about also, books as being sort of like reserves, like
Mm.
I also feel, especially of late, with everything going on, um, uh, and mounting, and the sort of cumulative effects of these last few years, say these last 5 years, or 10 years, or 100 years, or 1,000 years,
Yeah.
but that, I am running on fumes. I said it to Riv tonight, I'm just running on empty. And when you find a book that can fill you, as your book has done for me, fill you, but as Oscar Wilde said of the cigarette, but leave you wanting more. That's the greatest pleasure. Leave you satisfied but wanting more, and that I think that's like, when it comes down to it, like what keeps us here, what keeps us doing this work that within a sort of normative capitalist society has no value and has no worth, because it makes no money and basically produces no status, and so what does it do, and what it does is, um, even beyond communicating something, it sort of um, enlivens us, and it saves us in a way that the Messiah never could, because the Messiah is never coming. All we have are these books of poetry. I think I told you last time that I think sometimes of the poet as like a failed Messiah, or a failed messianic follower who knows, who wants the Messiah to come, but knows the Messiah is not coming, and so writes in the absence of the Messiah, writes into that. And RoseSunWater is doing that for me, because RoseSunWater is, when the Messiah comes, traditionally, that's when all of the dead are going to rise from their graves. But in the absence of that, how do we communicate with the dead? And I think that it's in this impure translingual tongue. One of the reasons that I came to the language that I came to, hosting it in English that I do, but thinking of my language as a poet not as English, but as something like, other than English, something before English, which I hold in English, tentatively and hesitantly. One of the reasons is because, and I think that, I want to hear what you have to say about this and how you feel about this. I don't feel that the tradition in American letters, as I was taught in high school and college and grad school and elsewhere, in grad school with certain people, holler to my people in grad school. Best people from grad school, you know who you are. And my worst, you know who you are. But the thing is, I always wondered, like, what the fuck do I have in common with Ezra Pound? What the fuck do I have in common with T.S. Eliot? Like, these are the people that I took seminars on in undergrad, who I was told, like, these are the poets that, like, created the tradition of experimental or in the language that you write in. And it's like, yeah, but these people wanted me dead. These people, Pound talks in his lectures on Mussolini's radio about dragging the Jews by the hair to the gas chambers.
Pound is a fascist. Yeah, absolutely, 1,000,000% with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, he was a self-identifying fascist, and never, the only thing he ever said to Ginsburg about it was that he regretted what he called the phobia of a suburban housewife, which was even a sort of worse way to talk about anti-Semitism, as the Jews are bugs or something. But yeah. And I think, if I remember correctly, Ginsburg asked, I think he played him Bob Dylan. This is so non sequitur, but it's funny. He played him Bob Dylan, and Ginsburg asked, Pound didn't respond. Ginsburg asked the nurse, "Do you think he likes it?" She said, "If he doesn't spit in your face, it means he likes it." I mean, so not knowing, like, how I fit into this language, and knowing that English was only one generation old in my, this is something that you and I share, right? Like, this is something diasporic. This is something migrant. This is something transient about us and about our writing, which is to say that like it feels like sheer coincidence, sheer sort of sort of coming together of random circumstances that brings us into English to talk like this. But our great grandparents didn't talk like this. Our grandparents didn't talk like this. Like, and they wouldn't have even had a place at the table, you know, in the dining room that we're trying to sit at, you know. And so I think part of it is like we have got all these food metaphors, but you know,
yeah. Well, no, I love that you're bringing in this notion because I'm gonna go ahead and challenge something you just said, because I think our text, like, and I'm thinking about the interview that happens at the end of your book specifically, but I think our texts are not necessarily vying for a seat at a table so much as we are outside and crafting our own table and having our own outside of the house of English, right? We're stealing all of the flatware. We're stealing the plates. They can keep that rickety ass table. We're on some outside, like, we can't stay in that house. That's the house that killed our ancestors. That house is haunted. Right? And so I think about I'm looking here and I think about dreams and how the dream space, the dreamscape, how that perhaps centers itself as the true language through which we seek a seat at this table, right? That's where we're really trying to sit, is on this like other level of the dreamscape, right? This other information that enters perhaps ancestrally, perhaps, you know, from the future. Like, I don't know, I think a lot of crazy things about dreams, but like I guess, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, two things that I think about that. First, because you mentioned the interview, and since you're mentioning dreams, I'll quote myself, which is, you know, faux pas, but why not? You know, to translate the dreams, to translate. Hold on, I can't even quote myself. I have to just.
I really just wanted you to say it. Like, it's such a great quote, but like, why am I going to say it when you're right here?
To translate the languages of my dreams, I became a poet. To translate the languages of my ancestors' dreams, I became a translator. And then in tandem with that, I want to just, you know, because I have all of these excerpts from your book out here in front of me. In my dreams, there's a language that keeps reaching outside of itself. This is you. My dreams keep telling me things about other people's dreams, and sometimes I think we're entwined by this celestial rhizome that extends beyond the planet and into other planes of thinking and being, and somewhere between the earth and this connection is where the writing happens, or at least it's where the intersection occurs in such a way that opens a space for writing. And I think that, in a way, that's the open space that we're talking about. You're right. We're not at the table. We're not in the dining room eating those, you know, for me, it's like, you know, eating those, like quietly eating like pork chops on crystal, and like, you know, drinking like Moscato wine or something. Like, we're outside with fucking tall cans. We've got the fucking Parisha going, like, you know, and we've got like fucking like cumbia playing, or like some fucking klezmer.
Yes.
And like we're around the fire, you know what I mean? Like our fucking ancestors did. And like, and we're channeling that magic. And one thing I wanted to say is like that part of what I'm trying to do in this book, and it is definitely like something I learned from one of my great teachers and dearest friends, Jerry Rothenberg, is that like the sort of high literary origins of literature as we understand it, like those are only one set of origins, and really not even the most interesting ones. And in fact, magic as it was understood, or prophecy as it was understood at the time, or spells or curses or blessings or prayers, these are other sources, and in many cases they're pre-literate sources.
Mm,
They're sources that exist around fires. They're sources that exist outdoors. They're sources that exist in dance and in movement and in song. And these are other sources which have been elided and eclipsed, over the centuries. And it becomes the job of the diasporic translingual writer, to find their way back to those technicians of the sacred, to
mm,
quote the title of Gary's great book. And I think you're right. I think we're out in a field. We're out in Porter Meadow. You know what I mean?
all these
There
years
we are.
later.
These years later, here we are. Found ourselves back in the Porter Meadow, and we're doing something else. And I think what's amazing is that all of the people who come to join us, because I think that what a lot of our contemporaries and what a lot of the writers that I'm most interested in, I dare say you're most interested in also, have come to realize is they don't want to sit at that table either, even if they can, because of whatever sort of history they have, whatever sort of they don't like that history, and they want to try to channel some of the future as well. And there's space in our field for those people, like
Mm,
there's
mm,
kind of an infinite amount of space in that outdoor, for people who want to move in those directions and not just sort of um, do what's already been done, just follow in the direction that's already our
mm.
existing direction.
Yeah, yeah, a return to the land, to the earth that pre-existed the house
That's
before the
right.
house was ever there,
That's
right?
right.
This, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and you're when you say that, I'll just say for anybody who's watching this, you're referring to your grandmother's house, uh, right?
Yeah.
In Southern California, and which is in a way one of the main characters, or one of the main sites or one of the main ghosts in your book. Um, and um, I talked about this very briefly when we talked last time. I think it's worth bringing up right
Hmm.
now. But in Hebrew, the word house, bayit, also means stanza. So when you
Hmm.
build a poem, you're building a house, and you're building a house in a certain way, um, to try to shelter yourself, from that space where the other house has been destroyed. Like your poem, your book is an alternate house. It's an
Mm,
alternate home, and it is Mobius. It's both interior and exterior at the same time, and that's this other amazing thing that I feel about your book is that it's constantly moving between these interiors and exteriors.
mm,
That is to say, like in one moment we're like outdoors on a beach and we're like under the sky and we are like 100% outdoors, but then in the next line we might find ourselves deep in the interior either of the home but also of your mind, and your brain also, or I should say the brain, or a not necessarily yours, it could be another brain that you're sort of thinking through,
mm,
your grandma's brain even, that that the interior of those thoughts and the intimacy, the deep intimacy. And I would say that the book begins with this photograph of a letter from your grandmother, right?
yeah.
um, no more, and in my sense, is that the book is a response to that letter in a certain way, or a way of trying to answer the letter that um, can't be answered any other way. But that is the most intimate way to begin a book, right? Like to begin with um, your grandmother's handwriting in that way and in Spanish. And the book does not begin in English; it begins deep in Spanish, um, I feel like, so incredibly lucky to have access to Spanish, though it's not the language of my ancestors. It's a
Mhm.
language that I studied for many years and translate and love deeply. And to be able to read that Spanish, to be able to read, I read your book initially as a PDF, and
Mhm.
zoom in on that letter and like with a magnifying glass, read each word. I mean, Avocha Shurim, this Hebrew, translingual Hebrew writer, the first Hebrew writer to address the Palestinian catastrophe in Hebrew
Mm.
in 1952, the first Hebrew writer to infuse his Hebrew with Yiddish and Arabic, which he believed to be sister exiled tongues. He has a poem called Habayit, the house, that I translated. And one of the things that he sort of argues through, implicitly argues through this poem, is that the site of the destruction of the house and the site of the construction of the house are the same site.
Hmm.
And so we actually have to untangle that in order to see clearly
Hmm.
what like rebuilding is, because construction is always a form of destruction. And so the freedom which is offered by not trying to build, but instead just trying to dwell. And I'll just say, because I've been sort of going off for a while and we haven't even scratched the surface, but things that Mikhail Skan Cohen, the painter the artist who did cover work
This
in the
amazing cover, yeah.
yeah, it's a work that exists. It belongs to my friend Zali Gurevich, and one of Mikhail's best friends gave it to him as a gift. And one of the things Mikhail used to say about this place, you know, um, about the state of Israel, and about the space of Israel-Palestine, is he he would say, I'll just say it in English. He would say, settlement, settlement, settlement. So sit down already. And actually, to settle and to sit are the same words in Hebrew. Hityashvut, 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 kvar tshev. Sit down already and stop building. You want to talk about settlement? So settle it, And I think that's one of the things that that's one of the powers that comes from the powerlessness of poetry,
Mm.
that it doesn't long to build an empire. It doesn't long for an army which can kill other nations. It doesn't want to fire rockets. It doesn't want to shoot stun grenades. It just wants to be. It just wants to dwell, and it just wants to create a space for others to dwell within it, and to learn with it and from it. And so I think that that's something that really ties us together in this sort of interdiasporic writing that we're doing.
Yeah. And can I just say, poetry does not long for empire is getting tattooed on my face? Like, what?
Maybe we should both get it across
Yeah, just, oh, that, my God, thank you. Um, God, I feel like we could talk forever. And perhaps we shall. Um, and maybe this is a good place to end our small press traffic recording. And because genuinely I could just keep talking to you for like the next 6 hours.
Well, we're gonna sign off and have our own little
Yeah,
feast and dance around the fire together. So
absolutely. And
miles
just
apart.
6,000 miles apart, and yet so close. So, as I told you before we started this recording, you are in my heart, and I love you very dearly. And this is very special to be able to come back together in this way, to be reunited through language, through poetry, through this outdoor party that we're all finding our way to in some way or another, right? So
I'll just say, Angel, I love you, and for me, there's no greater pleasure than this reunion, and I feel that this is just the beginning.